I was hoping to get to this much sooner, but here it is. Time to unbox the 2019 RadRover. Mystery box. And as always, first thing to do is to cut off about 1 million zip ties on any new bike. I like the fact that they have a little stand of sorts on the front that helps keep things stable while we trim everything off. And it looks like it's time to open up this box. The bike did arrive upside down, despite the fact that the box was labeled, of course, to be the other way. But I don't see any damage or anything, so nothing particular special about the packaging, but it kept the bike safe, and that's what's most important. Looks like we've got a toolkit, some standard Wellgo pedals, an owner's manual. Can't quite tell, I'll have to open that up. Ah, this is what I was looking for. The bolts for the stem, so I can put the handlebars on. And last but not least, looks like the charger. And I'm gonna take a quick guess and say this is probably the front headlight. Yep, that is it. Now it's totally unwrapped. We'll go ahead and put the handlebars on and put the front wheel on, and that should be it. The pedals, of course, the typical standard stuff you'd see from any e-bike you'd buy online. Go ahead and loosen up the quick release on here. Make sure the bike doesn't fall over. There we go. Pop that off of there. And get our front wheel on. And just a tip with the quick release, always make sure that you put the lever on the non-brake side. Believe it or not, if you go down a long, steep hill, you can actually get your discs hot. And if you go to remove your wheel, let's say if you're done with a ride, you don't want to either burn yourself on it, or it's also possible to cut yourself on some disc brakes. So be mindful of that, and make sure that the lever is pointing up, not down, because that way you can tell if it ever comes loose. If it's pointing down, you don't know if it's loose or if it's just hanging. We'll get this on here nice and snug. Okay, now let's get our pedals on. Make sure that you put the pedal with the left-hand threads on the left side of the bike and the right-hand threads on the right. That means to tighten up the one on this side, you're actually going to turn the opposite direction. Normally pedals are labeled left and right somewhere. Usually it's on the end right here. Surprisingly, these ones aren't, so just make sure you don't mix those up. Pedals are on, handlebars are on, tightened up, front wheel's on. At this point, really the only thing left to do is check the tuning of the derailleur, make sure it shifts properly, check the brakes, and of course charge up the battery. Almost forgot to put on the headlight. And unfortunately it looks like we are not off to a great start. I'm sure I'll find a solution. The battery has about 49 volts. Checked with the voltmeter, got it in the on position, and I do have some indicator lights on the battery, so I know it's working. I just disconnected the display. I'm going to go grab an older display that I have to see if this works. But basically, I am pushing the power button and holding it like you're supposed to, and the bike is not turning on. So hopefully this thing is not DOA or dead on arrival. I'm sure they'll fix it or take care of it if that's the case. But I got to figure out why the bike isn't turning on, because I can't do a proper review if it doesn't work. Okay, found my older display from an older RadRover, and hopefully they're compatible. let's plug this in and see if anything happens. The battery is in the on position. I got lights. But once again, does not turn on. So everything's pointing to a dead controller at this point. So let's try an old controller and see what happens. Now I have to interrupt in the studio here because this video should have been really simple, but it was plagued with all sorts of technical problems. So the RadRover is fixed. It turns out that the cable that runs inside the frame was disconnected during the packaging process, I assume, because I've had quite a few other people say that they had the same problem online. But it took a little bit of troubleshooting to figure out exactly where the problem happened, got that fixed. So from here on out, we'll go outside and take a look at the bike. Hey everybody, I promised a review for the 2019 version of the RadRover, and this is it. I'm not going to do any modifications to the bike because I want to give you just a fair comparison of what I think of the bike, the way it comes, the price that it's at, and not change anything or add any power to it until we've done that first. Now for this review, as well as future e-bike reviews, I've come up with 9 different things that I think bikes could be rated on, where we can actually give them a subjective score. And then there are some things that are just facts about the bike that are non-negotiable. So I'm not going to give the bike a score on the price. I'm just going to tell you what the price is. I'm not going to give the bike a score on the size, what person it would fit. I'm just going to tell you what size it would fit. Because if you are 5 foot tall or 7 foot tall, this bike should get a 0 for comfort. If you're my height, 5'10", it might get a really high score. So that depends on the person. Same thing goes for some of the general specifications. I'm just going to tell you what they are and just be as honest and upfront as I can. Now for those 9 things, I'm going to run through them really quickly at first and tell you what they are. And then if you have any suggestions or changes on those 9 things, please comment in this video. This is just kind of the first test on reviewing a bike that's not one that I build or sell or manufacture or anything. So I'm hoping I can use this model to review and compare other bikes in the future. So number 1 is going to be the first thing people always ask about, which is range. Number 2 will be the power of the motor. Number 3 is going to be the brakes, because after that you got to stop. Number 4 is going to be the display that's included in the bike, if there is one. Number 5 is going to be the components and the quality of the components used overall. Number 6 is the level of support available from the manufacturer. Number 7 is the community that's available. Are there other people riding the bike? Is there an online community? Can you get together with people for rides? That sort of thing. Number 8 is the customization, whether that is parts that are available from RadPower or the manufacturer of a bike or aftermarket support. And finally, number 9 is going to be the packaging and delivery. How well is it boxed? Do they generally arrive safely? That sort of thing. So let's go ahead and get started on some of the facts or the non-negotiable items about the RadPower bike. So let's talk about the height of the bike first. On RadPower's website, once again, this is the RadRover, 26-inch fat tires, 4 inches wide, 80 millimeter rims on it. They say, I believe it was 5 foot, I wrote it down, 5'4" to about 6'2". I think 5'4" is a little bit on the short end personally. I think you'd find the standover a little bit high, but 5'6" and above, 5'8", then you start getting more comfortable on the bike. For comparison, I'm approximately 5'10", and for me to get on the bike and stand over is not a problem, but even at 5'10", I don't have a whole lot of clearance. So comfortable once I'm on it, but the standover height, because you got to really measure from where you're actually standing over, not the lowest point, I would say the standover is a little high for the height range that they recommend. Now, as far as price goes, it is $14.99 with free shipping anywhere in the US, and they do also offer these in Canada as well. Now, the first thing that is extremely subjective
is range, and that's all determined by the battery on the bike right here. This is a 48 volt, 14 amp hour battery, which is pretty standard among bikes. Usually things I see nowadays are between 48 volts, 12 to 15 amp hour range. Sometimes you see a few brands out there with 52 volt batteries. But RadRover, or Rad Power, excuse me, for the RadRover bike, I think that they have a very realistic expectation because they say online 25 to 45 miles of range. You could get by with less range with that if you're using a lot of throttle and going up a lot of hills. And you could also go further than that if you pedal a lot. But I think the way most people use it, that is a pretty fair comparison. So I'm gonna give them an 8 on the range because yes, there are bikes out there where they'll go further, but you'll have to spend more. And I think Rad Power is being realistic with their numbers. Now, subjective item number 2 is gonna be the power and the motor that's on the bike. They call this a 750 watt electric fat bike, but is it really? Well, I'll leave that up to you. It does pull 750 watts from the screen. So in that manner, I would say that's true, but I wouldn't compare it directly to other 750 watt bikes or any 750 watt bike to any other 750 watt bike because I'm starting to see that Bafang will label it based on whatever the manufacturer wants it to label them as. So in some cases, this motor can be found on another bike and they call it a 500 watt model. Sometimes they call it a 750. Some bikes are called a 750 and the motor inside this case is physically larger and more powerful. So personally, I think is a little bit lacking on power. There are other bikes that say 750 watts. They're gonna accelerate a little bit better. And more importantly, when you really want some power to go up a hill, they're gonna provide more assistance than this bike does. So good for the price point, I believe, on power. A little bit lacking, kind of slow to take off from a start. So I'm only gonna give it a 6 as far as a rating on power and my opinion on it.
And I said I had technical problems. Number 3 on this list, and the original footage was shot outside, was about the brakes that came on the RadRover bike. Now the footage got corrupted, so I'll just tell you. Basically, it comes with standard mechanical disc brakes from Tektro. So inexpensive, but also I've never had any complaints about Tektro brakes either. So for the price, they're pretty good. The other thing that Rad Power did on the RadRover bike is they upgraded the rotors from 160 millimeters to a slightly larger 180 millimeter. So I give them a plus on the brakes. I'm gonna give them an 8 because there are higher quality mechanical brakes that could have been put on the bike, but I think those are very good for the price, and they get some extra points for upgrading those rotors, once again, to 180 millimeters.
So here's the display on the RadRover bike. You hold the button on there for a few seconds to turn it on. It's pretty basic. You have a battery level up in the corner. It's kind of an estimate. It doesn't give you an exact voltage, which would be nice. You've got odometer on the top right. You can change that to a trip meter. That's another area where I've seen complaints. If you go for a ride, you stop somewhere halfway along the way, turn off the bike, and then turn it on again, it resets the trip meter. So it doesn't save it when you turn the bike off. Other screens do that. For some reason, this one does not. You have the pedal assist in the bottom corner, anywhere from 0 up to 5. And then you have the watts, so approximately how much power you're using at the very bottom. So things that I wish were a little bit different. The screen display itself is a little bit smaller than some others, but that alone is not a deal breaker. The trip meter, as I mentioned, personally, I like to have a battery voltage somewhere in the menu so you can actually see the real battery voltage. That's helpful for troubleshooting and charging and other things to know, as opposed to these, which aren't always that accurate. And then if there's another complaint, if you're gonna leave the bike stock, this doesn't matter. But if you wanna change things, there's really no adjustability with this screen. You can't reprogram it, you can't do really anything with it. So as far as that goes, there are other displays, other things that would offer more functionality, more flexibility. So I'm gonna give the display a 6 because it gives you the basics, but there definitely are better options out there. Now, what about the overall components on the bike, like the shifter, the derailleur, the pedals, the chain, those types of things? Well, to be honest, they're pretty basic. There's nothing fancy about it all. You've got a thumb shifter from Shimano with 7 speeds up here. Now, this is kind of cheaper on the end as far as bikes go, but it's really common on electric bikes, and having built a lot of them, I know why. And that's because when you have a throttle here, it complicates things if you go with a trigger style shifter where you can put the throttle which side. So I don't fault them for putting that here because I know there's some manufacturing and just design challenges with putting something nicer there. Although I prefer a trigger shifter, I know why it's there. And on the back, they did change the freewheel to give you a wider range. So nice change. You could change that really on any bike for 30, 40 bucks or so, but nice that they did that. The fork does have a lockout on it, but not really adjustable aside from that. Relatively inexpensive fat bike fork. So it's not something you're gonna go do some crazy mountain biking with. You can go on some decent trails, hit some bumps here and there, but I'd say overall the components are definitely spec'd for the bike, trying to keep it under that $1,500 price range. So just fair components across the board on the whole bike. So gonna give it a, let's be fair and call it a 7, because I think they didn't go cheap on anything, but there's nothing particularly nice about the components either. Now, what about factory support from RadPower? That's one thing that I hear a lot of great things about, and that is the level of service from RadPower. I've never heard anything bad, so can't fault them for anything there. I'm gonna say they deserve a 9. It sounds like they've worked hard for it. I've had a few customers bring in RadPower bikes and I've worked on them or troubleshot things on them, and they've always been responsive to phone calls or sending out parts and taking care of things under warranty. The only way I think you get better than a 9 is if you figured out how to do some sort of mobile support program, or you had a dealer network, but those are all things that jack up the price. So if someone figures out how to sell a bike for this price point and have a nationwide dealer network that's really good at supporting the bikes, that'd be great. But I think a 9 is as good as you can do without raising the price. Number 7 on my list is community. So what I mean by that is, are there other people with the bikes? Are they online? Do they have groups? Do they talk to each other? Do they get together for rides? And the answer to that is absolutely yes. So RadPower bikes have a very big group on Facebook. I know people get together for meetups and rides. They definitely do things around the store from what I've seen. So I think they do really well as far as that goes. I think they should get a 10 out of 10 on the community level, because you can definitely find people online or in your local area that are going to have RadPower brand bikes, and they're going to chat with each other. Probably the only other bike company that rivals it as far as the number online, I'd say, would be Saunders. Don't hate me for saying that, Saunders or RadPower bike owners. But there's good community support. People are very supportive of each other, and so 10 out of 10 on that. Number 8 would be customization. Now that includes a couple of things. 1 would be customization from RadPower, and 2 would be customization from aftermarket suppliers. So it does come with a headlight and a taillight standard on the 2019 model. They do sell fenders for it, and they do have racks for it. On the downside, some bikes in similar price ranges come with fenders and racks with the bike. So a little bit of a downer that you got to pay extra for that, but at least they're available. Now, as far as other parts go, there's a few aftermarket things. I've got some brakes, hydraulic brakes of different types that are a direct fit to this bike now. I've got a color display and upgraded controller and bigger motors and other things, and I'm starting to work on more products for these bikes. So the aftermarket support is growing, but from the manufacturer it's pretty limited. So if you want a different throttle, for example, there aren't any options. If you just wanted to change the screen without changing any other parts, that's not an option. As far as spare batteries go, You can get a spare battery, but not of a higher capacity. So somewhat limited as far as aftermarket support. Saunders probably has the most aftermarket parts available of any e-bike at the moment. I think there's a chance that RadPower may catch up to that. So give them a 7 on that now because it's growing, it's in progress. I think that number is only going to get better. And number 9 for the RadRover bike is packaging and delivery. So did the bike arrive safely? How was it packaged? I am happy to say that it did arrive safely, but I did have a problem with it. So I don't know if it was the packaging process or the testing process, but somehow in the process of the bike getting shipped to me, the cable that goes...
And I'm back to interrupt again because of more corrupt footage. Basically, I gave the RadRover a 7 on packaging. The box was well labeled. I felt like it was a decently sturdy box. The packaging materials inside were pretty decent. Everything arrived safely, but there was something in the process that made the cable inside the frame become disconnected and the bike to not work. And I'm not the only one that's had that problem. I've seen several other cases online. So hopefully by the time this video comes out, RadPower will already be aware of that and have fixed that process. I think that's something they should be able to easily take care of. But as far as how I received the bike, it got a 7 on packaging, not necessarily because any of the materials weren't good, but because the process of packaging the bike made it not work on arrival.
So there you have it. Those are my thoughts on the 2019 RadRover. Make sure to hit that subscribe button, hit the like on this video, comment if you have any questions. If you want to see me upgrade this bike with some aftermarket parts, make sure to come back for future videos. Now, if you've decided after watching this that the RadRover is the bike for you, you can get a $50 Amazon gift card if you put my name in the referral box when you check out on radpower.com. So put Kyle Chittock in there, and I think I'll get one too, but to be honest, I don't really care. I just want people to get a bike they're gonna be happy with. And I have many other bikes, a lot of fat bikes, but to be honest, I don't have one that's 750 watts or in this power range, in this size range for $1,500. I will have one in the near future that is similar in size to this bike, but it's going to be more powerful, come with a color display, hydraulic brakes, and the price point's going to be a little bit higher. So a step up in quality, but also a slight bump up in price. So just something to be aware of. Thanks again for watching. I think I'm going to take this bike and go ride it around.